The Chameleon antenna HOA Porta Mast is a flexible piece of gear to use at the QTH or portable ops, and here I am hanging my American flag and a wire antenna on a holiday weekend chasing special event stations. I decided on a semi-permanent installation at the QTH, meaning in ground, and after selecting the perfect spot, I went about the hard work of digging a hole in the ground to accept that concrete pillar. And I'm going to take you through every step of the way of how to do this. Before you jump in the truck and head on down to the local home improvement store, you need to put a lot of thought into this. You should view the Chameleon instructions as necessary but minimum. Imagine trying to give instructions for people all across the geographical regions of the United States of America with different soils, different wind conditions, different weather conditions. It's near impossible, so they must give the necessary but minimum, and from that baseline it's up to you to make sure you make the necessary adjustments for the best installation possible where you live. Hey everyone, Bob here, KD4BMG HOA Ham. If you're still watching, it's because you like to watch people put things together, or you want to install one of these yourself in the ground, and you've come to realize once that concrete pillar is set, it's lights out, there's no options for changing things, and you want to get someone else's experience on this. I've lived in southeastern Pennsylvania, and now I live in central Florida. I've split my life between those two locations, so I understand construction in the Northeast, and I understand construction in the extreme south of the USA. I don't know much about the West Coast. So I'm going to give you some of my tips and tricks that I used during this, and I'll just call them pro tips, and I'm just going to feed them to you throughout the video. Pay attention to them. I think it'll be important for your installation. Pro tip number one is overbuy on materials. These are inexpensive materials and you don't want to have to stop partway into the job and go back and get more. I bought 2 bags of drainage pebbles instead of 1 bag of stone, and I only thought I needed 1, but in the end I needed 2. I overbought on the cement, and you want to overbuy on cement because you cannot stop once you begin the pour. And oh, by the way, look out, hold your breath here. All right, we're past that. Overbuy materials. These are inexpensive materials. Once you start that concrete pour, you may not stop it. You want it to be a wet pour to the end. Use the Chameleon antenna instructions as the starting point for your materials list, and then adjust it based on where you live and what modifications you may need to make. We're going to talk about frost line and a bell shape pillar. So I'm just drawing 2 different pillars that we would dig into the ground. The green line represents grass, in case you couldn't tell from my artistic ability. Typically, you would dig straight down and in the form of a cylinder when you're pouring this pillar of concrete, and that's what this represents, as close to a perfectly dug cylinder as possible. You're going to see me use a pillar form, and that pillar form does not go all the way down into the hole that I've done, so please don't mistake that. I'm going to exaggerate this. Don't do it at this much of an angle, but here we would be digging on an angle. And maybe let's just call this more of a bell shape. Let's dig this like a bell. Which one of these 2 do you believe would be stronger against wind? Which one of these 2 would pull out of the ground easier? Which one of these 2 would be affected most by frost line? Well, both of them are going to be affected by frost line. If you're frost line, what color should we pick for frost? None of these colors really look chilly. Let's just go with gray. If your frost line is right across here, I would say that this is not quite as deep as I would want it yet. I would want to go a little bit deeper on this, and this is going to fail in time because your concrete pillar is above the frost line. Frost is going to cause upheave, and that tube, that concrete pillar, is going to come out of the ground at some point. So if you're in an area that's impacted by frost, make sure you dig below the frost line and dig in a bell shape. And again, I've exaggerated this. It doesn't need to be this extreme, but I mean, it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top, and that gives that concrete pillar great grip in the ground. So when you're measuring for how much concrete and how much stone you want, it's not this formula, it's this over here. And measure at the widest end. and multiply that, or whatever the right formula is, times the depth. Wow, what a wonderful picture at this point. If you've listened to what I said, you've caught on. Get the appropriate amount of materials for this particular scenario, and you're going to be good to go. Before we go any further, let's get some really important things right up front. Call before you dig. Google that. For your particular area, you should get a phone number that you call. It makes sure that you are not in line with any utilities that if you hit, you could harm yourself or your surrounding area. So call before you dig to know that you're digging in a safe place. If you're not physically fit for this kind of work, then subcontract it out. Depending on how hard your soil is, this is quite the job, but I can guarantee you mixing that cement and turning it into concrete is hard work, and I was doing that in the summertime here in the Tampa Bay area. Follow your local building codes if there's anything specific that you have to modify your installation to. Buy, borrow, rent the right tools. Don't try to dig this hole with a little gardener's shovel. Go rent yourself a post hole digger, a manual one or a motorized one if that's necessary for your particular area. Get the right tools for the job. I dug the hole one day and filled it the next with concrete so the hole didn't have time to collapse. And here I am staging all my materials so they're right there as I begin the pour. Keep your eyes open. We're going to be photobombed. Here he comes. Let me do that in slow motion so you can see him again. He must have liked my camera. That was pretty cool. Let's get our first bag of pea gravel in the bottom of this hole. This pea gravel will help with drainage for any water that gets down the pipe. I know I'm going to need a second bag because I dug this in a bell shape, so I know I need more volume of stone. Once I get my second bag of stone in, grab the tape measure and measure to see if the post will sit in this gravel and come up to the top of the hole right as I planned. Make sure you have the right size ground sleeve. There's a 2.5 inch and a 3 inch depending on which Porta Mast you purchased. Gently push it into the pea gravel after you make sure the bolt is down towards the pea gravel and the red cap is towards the top. I use my 4-foot level as a straight edge, firmly pushed against the ground to make sure the sleeve is about 1 inch above ground level. Utility knife? I don't think so. Let's get this form tube cut the length, and then I'll explain what I'm doing with it. And believe it or not, we want the short piece. It was less than 12 inches long. The instructions don't mention this form for the pillar, so exactly what am I trying to accomplish? Let's head on back to the 3rd grade level drawing and I'll explain myself. The form only has one purpose, and that's to make the top of my pillar look uniform, look like a nice circle. So I only used about a 10-inch section of it, and it just forms the top of the concrete pillar. The concrete is all filled in all around here. All the rest of this is filled in with concrete, and the only thing that is a perfectly round circle is what is covered by this form. That's what we want to do. By all means, do not put the form all the way down to the bottom of your hole. And the reason for that is quite simple. You've created a weak point, because when you go to backfill this, well, let's just use brown for dirt. Do we have brown? We don't have brown? Okay, let's pick blue. Fill this in with dirt, and now what you have is backfill. And when you get wind load on the side of this thing, it's going to push that tube back and forth against your fill, and it's going to move your concrete pillar. Don't do that. So if you're going to use a form like I did, do it like this and just put it in the very top. So the very top of your concrete pillar is nice and round like it should be. And all below this is concrete. And you're going to see me do this. I'll show specifically what I'm talking about here in just a few minutes. Are we ever going to get to concrete? Why, yes, we're almost there. Pro tip, dry fit everything before you mix your first bag of concrete. Make sure everything is at the proper height, centered, and fits just like you want it to. The minimum but necessary instructions from Chameleon are sufficient to install the Porta Mast. I have so much construction experience throughout my entire life that I can't help myself but to go and add my own personal flair and touch to this and things that are important to me. What I'm about to show you next, I would strongly recommend against unless you really know what you're doing and are comfortable with taking on this level of risk, because it's all on you if you get it wrong. My backyard is where this Porta Mast is going with this semi-permanent in-ground installation. By semi-permanent, you do realize you pull your mast out and you take it portable when you want to. But this is where it goes when I want to fly my flag and my antenna. It happens to be at a portion in my yard where my lawn guy is going to run over it every time he comes to mow my lawn. We could only locate this here because we want to give the illusion that all this is a flagpole in the HOA. And it is a flagpole, and it's an antenna mast. There was only one place to locate this, so it's almost in the middle of the yard. So I couldn't have the tube, the pipe, sticking out of the ground. My lawn guy would run it over and destroy it. So I put in a Schedule 40 pipe that fits the Porta Mast. I added a top to it, a fitting to it that allows me to screw in a brass lid. So now my lawn guy can run over this all day long and not damage it. If I did this wrong and I put the Porta Mast in and jammed it into place and couldn't get it out, that is 100% my failure and on me. So don't do this unless you're comfortable, unless your requirements force you into this. If I could have put this in a bed of shrubbery or flowers, I would have gone precisely with the recommendations in the instructions and put the Chameleon provided tube about an inch above the surface of the ground and put that red lid on top of it for protection from rain. I had to do this because I had no other choice. Now you understand why my tube looks a little different and why it has a brass top instead of a red lid. I'm setting the tube now flush with the ground. Remember, my lawn guy can run this over all day long, so my tube is flush with the concrete pillar, flush with the ground. One more pro tip before we take some cement, add some water, and magically turn it into concrete. You're going to want a 4-foot level, and you're going to want to check this pipe for plumb over and over and over. I probably won't show but a third of the times that I put my level on this and checked for plumb. It's critical because you want your mast to fly true and plumb once this is all finished, and that's all dependent on this pipe being plumb. Finally, cement and concrete. Now let me give you a couple of pro tips in a row, and these are important. If we get this first bag right, it's the most important. The other bags are important, but I think the first is most important. Do not use quick set concrete or quick cure. Quickcrete is a brand, but quick set is a type, meaning the concrete sets up quickly, and you don't want that to happen. Use regular concrete mix or cement mix. Do not use a quick set concrete. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how much water to put into concrete. I have mixed so many bags in my life, I just kind of know what to look for. If you end up with peanut butter, it's too thick, quickly get more water into it. If you end up with liquid soup, it's too thin. Take some cement mix from another bag and thicken it up a bit. Follow the instructions on the bag as a starting point, and then kind of gauge whether or not it's thick enough or thin enough. You'll see me here in a second as I begin to trowel it into the hole. It just slides right off of my trowel, and that's what you want. And when I get towards the bottom of my mixing bin, I just tilt it up and pour it in. That's what you want. You want it a little loose because we want it to spread all around this pipe as we're pouring from the bottom up. So mix it a little bit wet, except that last batch, because you're going to complete the form at the top and you don't want water pouring out everywhere. Once you start with your concrete, you must not stop until you are finished. Go bag after bag after bag. So don't do this until you're ready to do the entire job. You want what's called a wet pour. You never want the first bag to dry before you mix and put the second bag in. Continue bag after bag after bag after bag quickly as you can so that you don't have to worry about things drying out. And here's another tip. Just be careful with this. Concrete doesn't dry, it cures. It's more of a chemical reaction than it is the process of dehydrating. So you could spray a little bit of water inside of the hole just to moisten it a bit. You don't want a puddle at the bottom. I have very porous dirt here, so I would pour until it became moist. If your dirt isn't porous, don't spray it down so that you have a puddle at the bottom, but that's one way you could keep this from drying too quickly and curing a little bit slower. Concrete that dries too quick becomes brittle. You want it to cure slowly. You can see the concrete is just sliding off the trowel, and you can see me spinning around the tube. I'm going around the pipe. So evenly distribute this as quickly as you can so you can get on to your next bag. Before we get to that next bag, there are some really important instructions. So finish getting this first bag of cement turned into concrete into this hole, and now let's talk about what the next step is. The first bag of concrete is in the ground, and here's the next pro tip. Use the Porta Mast itself to check your plumb. Level is horizontal, plumb is vertical. And check for plumb in two different planes. If you go north-south, you're checking the same plane. If you go east-west, you're checking the same plane. So think 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. That gets you, what, east and south? Or 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock. It gives you the two opposite sides that this could be out of plumb. So check it right after you pour that first bag of concrete. Now, if the wind is blowing really hard, it could push this over just a little bit. So I didn't have wind this day, so I didn't have that problem. So that's something you need to be aware of. And you're also going to have to be careful not to slop any of your concrete mix up against the Porta Mast where it could drip down inside of the pipe itself, because that could create a problem for you in removing the Porta Mast after this cures. I found the best way to check my plumb was to leave the Porta Mast in. The first bag of concrete is poured. I am now plumb. I quickly go and I mix my second bag, my third bag, my fourth bag. I don't remember if I used the fifth bag or not. This was a couple of weeks ago, but they all went back to back to back as quickly as I could. And after each mix and each pour, I checked multiple times for plumb. The longer you go and get out of plumb, the harder it's going to be for you to get back into plumb. So start with one bag and make sure you're plumb. As soon as you get that second bag in, check for plumb. You can shift it a little bit. By the time you get to that last bag, you're not going to shift this, and whatever you have, you have. So make sure you're plumb, check it repeatedly, and use a real level. Don't use some tiny little torpedo level. Get yourself a 4-foot level, because that's going to do a better job of spanning a longer distance and helping you get plumb. Bag number 2 is mixed and in the hole, and now it's time to check plumb. 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock. You can see I'm still shifting just a little bit here, and with the second bag in, poured immediately after the first bag and poured a little bit wet, I'm able to shift the Porta Mast, which means I'm shifting that tube that's in the ground and in the concrete, and I'm getting it perfectly plumb. By the time I get bag 3 in here and bag 4, I'm not going to have any opportunity to move this. Get it right now. Bag number 3, mixed and in the hole, and have I mentioned, check for plumb? Check for plumb again. Here we are on bag 3, check for plumb, and now we're coming up on bag 4. So now in retrospect, it was 4 bags total. I'm sliding my form over the top, and I'm making sure that it is flush with the ground. So my concrete pillar will be flush with the ground, my PVC tube and my brass lid will all be flush with the ground. Don't have to worry about what the lawn guy is going to do. As you mix the final bag, do make sure that it is not as loose as the first 3. As you get to the top of this, you don't want any excess water mixed with concrete going down in between the tube and the Porta Mast. That's going to make that Porta Mast near impossible to get out. So you want this to be a little bit more on the drier side. And as I get close to the top of the tube, you want to use a smaller trowel. You see me change over from a large mixing trowel down to a small margin trowel so I can really control what I'm doing and make the top of this look nice and pretty. Once this cures in 24 hours, I'll pull out the Porta Mast. I'll make sure that my brass lid fits just fine, and I'll backfill some dirt around the outside of the hole in between the opening of the hole and the top form. There's only one thing left to do at this point, and let's all say it together. Check for plumb. There's not a thing you're going to be able to do about it if it's not plumb, but if you paid attention every step of the way, it is going to be plumb, and it's a thumbs up, ready to go. That's right, perfect. Make sure you let this cure sufficiently. I think I waited 3 days before I extended the Porta Mast and started flying my flag and my new antenna. After all the planning and effort, would I do it again? In a heartbeat. This is easily one of my new favorite pieces of gear for portable and QTH operation. Thanks for watching, friend. Talk to you soon. 73.